Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. Today I'm continuing work on the Farmall MD restoration. The engine's at the machine shop, so I'm left to work on the various sub-assemblies that go onto the engine. Now, a gasoline engine needs three things to start. It needs compression at the cylinders, it needs spark at the spark plugs, and it needs a good fuel-air mixture coming out of the carburetor. Even though I'm working on an MD, it starts like an M does. It starts on gasoline, so these three things have to be met. Today I'm working on the intake manifold and carburetor, which are the source of that good fuel-air mixture. So we're going to pay attention to detail and get into them. This is the carburetor and intake manifold, and these were completely unique to the gas start diesels that International made. This carburetor appears on none of the other tractors. It's hard to get parts for, so we're going to take it all apart, including the intake manifold, which is quite a complicated assembly, as you'll see. Unfortunately, these nuts that hold the carburetor on are so tight to the carburetor that you can't get a socket on them, so it's just slow work with a hand wrench. Now that I got the carburetor off, I can give you guys an overview of how this works. So this is where fresh air comes into the manifold from the air cleaner. The manifold is divided into two air passage systems. This is the main air passage for diesel when it's running on diesel. This small set of air passages down here is for gasoline when it's running on gasoline. As you can see, there's two different intake ports for each one, diesel and gasoline, and a set of butterflies in here that are closed when it's running on gasoline, which forces air through this little port instead of the big port, and they are open when it runs on diesel, and you switch it back and forth like this. Hopefully you can see the butterflies moving in there. And it's on a spring over center so that it snaps either entirely open or closed. Now, the carburetor is a real funky design. This is the air inlet for the carburetor, which you can see goes straight through into the air inlet. And then this is where the fuel air mixture exits the carburetor, and it goes into these little passages back into the engine. So it's a strange carburetor. Usually air will enter one side of the carburetor and then air fuel mix will exit on a different side of the carburetor, but this one, it happens on the both on the same side. So that's one unique thing. When it comes to the carburetor itself, it is a super simple carburetor. What you have here is, this is the choke plate that I'm turning right here. So you've got air coming in, fresh air coming in right here. And then this is what would normally be the throttle plate in the carburetor, except you can't change it. It's not like there's a throttle control on the tractor. When it runs on gas, it runs at idle RPM, and that's it. And how far this plate here is shimmed up determines how rich the air-fuel ratio is and how fast the tractor will run. There's no governor on the gas side to control the RPMs. It's just a fixed meter here through this plate. And then there's a spec in the book for how far off this plate has to be. Now, my dad shimmed this plate up, I believe, if I remember what he told me correctly, to try to get it to run a little faster on gas, but we're going to return this to spec. Just take the bottom bowl off first. This is the carburetor in its upright position. If I pull it apart here, let me go through its parts. First of all, the fuel comes in here from the gasoline starting tank, and the needle valve's upside down compared to what I see in other International tractors. It actually closes down this way, so the fuel comes in, and when this float is raised up, the needle valve is closed and no more fuel can get in. As the float drops, as the tractor uses fuel, the needle valve opens up and allows fuel to come into the bowl here. Let's take the throttle plate off of here so I can explain more how the top end of the carburetor works. On a normal carburetor, when you open it up, you would see what's called a venturi at the top of the bowl with a fuel nozzle that comes into it, and the vacuum created by the venturi sucks the fuel into the airflow, and then you get a fuel air mixture out of the top. This one doesn't work that way at all. Air comes in through here where the choke plate is, so you can choke it by closing the plate, and it never gets close to the fuel bowl. There's no big hole for that air to flow through like it normally would on a carburetor. Instead, what you have is you've got this very fine fuel suction orifice down at the bottom. Oops, goes on this way. So you've got this orifice down at the bottom that brings in fuel, and the fuel sprays into this area in here, which is running a vacuum because it's pulling air in from the intake. And the mixing happens in this space down in here instead of in a venturi. It doesn't really look like a very efficient air fuel mixing mechanism to me, but that's the way it works. We'll take the rest of the pieces off this so I can get them ready to put in carburetor cleaner and clean them all up so we can assess them better. So take this fuel nozzle off. Sometimes with carburetors you get into these awful situations where you're working with little brass pieces and you can't turn them out with a screwdriver and they get stripped, and then you're in a world of trouble. So this is what they call the fuel metering well. This fills up with fuel to the level that the float determines in the carburetor bowl. And then this is the nozzle itself that brings the fuel in via vacuum and sprays it into the mixing chamber in here. Definitely in need of a lot of cleanup. Boy, this carburetor is so weird. This is a fuel overflow and it connects just past the choke plate, so if that chamber under there becomes flooded, then instead of the fuel draining out the bottom, which is what would happen on a normal carburetor, the fuel exits via this fitting that goes on here, and then there's a tube that goes down to the bottom of the engine, so the fuel drips out through that tube instead of out the bottom of the carburetor. This is what's called the fuel inlet tube, and I'm a little confused as to its purpose because the fuel's coming into the airspace via this main nozzle here that I already took out. So I'm not exactly sure. It connects to a hole up here by the choke, but it has to come off, and it's stuck. You can see where somebody really yanked on it with a flat blade screwdriver before and bent it. So very carefully, using a rag and a pair of vice grips, I'm going to try to turn this out without harming it. Nope. We'll put the vice grips directly on it and just be careful. The only thing I'm worried about is collapsing. I'm not worried about scratching it a little bit. That ain't going to do it any harm. Nope. Next thing to try is a little heat. Just a little bit of heat. There we go. Didn't take much heat. Now this mechanism right here is on this eccentric, and what that does is, see, this is the float lever here. When you switch it from gas to diesel, what this lever does is it comes down on this cam here and it pushes on this lever and locks the float in the up position, which closes the needle valve and doesn't let any more fuel into the carburetor. So the gas supply is stopped when this cam is actuated. It's connected to the linkage that goes all through the engine and controls the gas to diesel switchover. Here goes the nut. There's that cam that holds the float up. See, one thing that's important, see that packing around there? Oh, it's shot. It fell right apart. I'm going to have to find a replacement for that. We don't want any air getting into the carburetor where it's not supposed to, and that's what these packings take care of. Yikes. Next step is to take the choke assembly out, and there's a pin on this side that needs to be punched out. Oh, this may connect. The choke plate just may hold this whole thing together. That would be very surprising. That's what it feels like. Yep. Wow, that's a pain in the butt job saved. No pin to drive out. Then pull this other end out. there's a little detent ball in here that sits in this little space and keeps the choke from rotating too freely. There's a spring behind it, so that it's always riding against the spring. Hope I didn't lose that little ball. There it is. There's just a spring back in here to push on the ball. There we go. Little spring. That's the packing right there. And there's another packing right there. There's a choke plate. And I'll pull these packings out. These are my homemade soft jaws for the vise. Quick and easy. There we go. There was no way that was coming out whole and undamaged. It's frozen right in there. This is the packing retainer here, this metal part, and then you can see all this fragmented hard stuff. That's the packing. I'm going to have to come up with replacements for those. For the bottom half, this is the fuel inlet. We'll see if there's a screen on here. Normally there is a screen on the inside. Yeah, so this is the final fine fuel screen. It is really clogged up. Man, good cleaning is going to do wonders for this. Now I'll take the float and needle valve assembly off. This is a pivot pin that runs through that everything pivots on. We just got to pull that out and it should drop out. This is the needle valve that meters fuel into the carburetor. And then this is the float, which is made out of rubber. Usually these are brass rings. Very old ones are cork, but that one's rubber. And then the needle valve seat is down in here, and we'll take that out. So the needle valve fits in here and makes a fuel tight seal when it's down like this. And the last thing to take out here is just this drain plug. That's going to take a little heat, I think. Doesn't take much heat. You know, see, I can still hold on to this. I didn't put much heat on it, and then it turns right out. And that's just a pipe plug. So here are all the carburetor parts. I'm going to put them in a basket and put them in carburetor cleaner here and let them soak. And hopefully they'll come out nice and shiny clean. Make sure all the gaskets are off of everything. These gaskets are all shot, and I'm not sure where I'm going to find new ones. Yet another challenge, which I like. Let that soak for a good long time. Now the next thing while the carburetor's soaking is to pull this grimy old intake manifold apart, inspect all the pieces, and clean it all up. Well, ain't that cool? This is the over center mechanism that controls the butterflies. So you can see it's more complicated than I thought it would be. When that spring flips over center, see it's at its longest point now, it'll snap shorter in either direction to open or close the butterflies. And this mechanism here is to ground out the magneto. Although it's been disconnected on this tractor, this is running on gas. The copper plate is not contacting any metal. This is a grounding plate that runs to a wire that grounds out the magneto, and when you switch it, that little pin there comes against that copper plate and grounds out the magneto via this wire, which, as I said, is missing. Pretty cool. Take this other cover off. I haven't decided yet, finally, whether to go with a magneto or a distributor on this engine. Yes, magnetos provide a great hot spark, but I can't fix everything that would go wrong with a magneto here in my shop. I can fix anything that might go wrong with a distributor. And the big thing is the coil. I can't diagnose a bad coil. It takes special equipment. And with a distributor, I can just run down to the auto parts store and get a new one if I have one go bad for less than 20 bucks, whereas a magneto coil is going to cost me 50 or more bucks to get replaced. Take that spring out. We'll remove this grounding mechanism. To keep this assembly from grounding out all the time, they use Bakelite plates here, which are non-conductive. Now we got to take this actuator off. This connects to the linkage that switches the tractor from gas to diesel. This linkage is held in place by a tapered pin. There. Tapered pin. Now we got to pull the butterflies out of here. Well, this is going to be lots of fun. Somebody whacked on the heads of the screws that hold the butterfly plates in place, and they closed up the slot that the screwdriver fits in when they whacked on them. Yeah. Well, I really want to get them out, so I'm going to try to drum them with a diamond bit on them to open the slots back up. Yeah, that's working pretty good. Well, let's heat them up a little bit and see what that does. Yeah, that did it. Actually, that screw broke. There's another fun little project, rethreading that hole. Well, I got both the screws out except one broke, and I can't pull the butterfly out because the screw is on the right-hand side there, broken far enough up where it binds up the butterfly plate. So I'm going to have to drill it out. With old tractors, you might think something's going to take 5 minutes. It winds up taking you an hour or more, especially drilling out and rethreading screw holes or bolt holes that have broken. That's the way it goes. What I'm going to have to do, because I can't get down in there very well, is I'm going to have to drill out the screw that I got, and then when I put it back together, I'll go to the next size screw up and rethread the hole. There we go. Yes, I dinged up the face a little bit, but that doesn't really matter, just as long as I can clean up the edges so it fits tight when it goes in. There we go. Hooey! That was a good bit of work. And I'll do the other side. Yippee! Well, both of those screws broke off. I'm going to have to drill them both out. Plate number 2. Wow. Now this one I'm going to have to clean up along this shaft before I take it out because it's so gunked up. It'll never come out by itself. There we go. Even though this is just an intake manifold, one of the reasons I wanted to get the butterflies out of there is it's all crudded up inside from backfire or whatever, and I want to get all that cleaned out of there and get it nice and clean. Let's see how the carburetor parts are doing. Looks pretty good. Brush some of the remaining crud around here, make sure it's loosened up. I'm going to go out and give these a rinse in water, and then we'll see how they look. Then I'll blow them dry with compressed air. We got a little bit of crud left here and there that I'm going to take off with the Dremel. Here are all the carburetor parts ready to be reassembled. I was lucky to find a rebuild kit for this carburetor online at one place and one place only. The kit includes new gaskets, new packings, and a new needle and seat. So I'm waiting on those, and then I'll put the carburetor back together. And until then, we'll pack everything up for safekeeping. And here are all the cleaned up parts for the intake manifold. Luckily, my gasket set had new gaskets for it. Before I put it back together, I have to drill out and retap these holes for the butterflies that control the airflow. So I'll be getting to that in a future video, as well as putting the carburetor back together. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.